that's great advantage that we can keep it very interactive. And this being said, handing over to Odin, and yeah, thanks a lot for joining us today. I think it's already the second webinar that you're holding, right? I think, Odin, you had a very similar session in German, so it's very nice. And towards the end, I will also give an outline of some upcoming sessions under this KoSI event webinar series.
Indeed, we decided to do it both in German and in English. So today's the English session. Thanks so much for the invitation. Thanks, Juliane, for the intro. Hi, everyone. My name is Odin Mühlenbein. I'm a partner at Ashoka Germany, where I do anything and everything that is somehow related to this idea of systems change that we are going to introduce today. As Juliane said, we are a sufficiently small group, so please do actually interrupt also the presentation part. There's no time rush. Hello, so it seems like at least on one PC there are several people watching. So either of you at any point, unmute yourself and ask questions. Let me quickly share the presentation. Quick thumbs up if this works, I guess so. Agenda is straightforward. We are going to do a little bit of super quick introductions, this whole notion of symptoms versus systems. We will talk about systemic strategies, how they look like, what the different steps are. We will look at leverage points in particular as an introduction to a short exercise that you can do by yourself, just a 5-minute thing. We will talk about end games a little bit. We will have time for questions and answers, and at the end I will provide a few tips for deep dives, material, online courses, that kind of stuff. So without further ado, jumping right in, why do we talk about systems change in the first place? Well, it's basically this super familiar idea of an iceberg or a hippo, depending on which country you live in, apparently. The idea being that the eyes of the hippo or the top of the iceberg above the water surface, that's the stuff you can see. Those are the symptoms of social problems. These are the people who live on the streets, the students who struggle with math, whatever tangible thing in the world that motivates you to act. And then the realization is just that these symptoms don't just fall from the sky. They don't just magically appear. They are constantly being produced by our social systems. So like our education system, our healthcare system, our system of city planning, our political opinion forming system, all kinds of systems. And so that is why we ultimately want to change those systems so they don't produce these problems on an ongoing basis. And the thing is, if we don't do that, then the symptoms that we might be able to treat for some people for some time will just reappear. So if you see the students struggling with math and you provide this amazing mentoring program to 1,000 of those kids, well, those 1,000 kids might not struggle as much for a year or two, or however long you give the mentoring program, but chances are, like, that all the other kids that you don't reach will still have the problem, and as soon as you stop doing the intervention, the next generation of students will have the problem again. And so the question really is, how much have you really achieved in the end? And so today we are going to look at another approach, which is to tackle the actual reasons why these symptoms occur, so that you might actually stop the problem instead of just continually treating the symptoms of it. Now, before we do that, a big disclaimer. I think overall, like as a society, we should spend the vast majority of our resources on symptoms. It would be absolutely mayhem to redirect all the doctors towards changing the healthcare system and nobody is doing the diagnosis and the treatments anymore, or likewise, to delegate 25% of all the teachers to change the education system. Absolutely nonsense. But what I am saying is that maybe 5% of our resources and efforts should be spent on changing our core social systems, and that is way more than we currently actually do. And so as long as we are still only spending maybe 0.1% on systems changing efforts, it's a good bet that that your money and time will be better spent on systemic initiatives. Once we have realized this, and once the social sector is at the 5% threshold, things might get a little bit more dubious. Like there is such a thing as like too much change and too many people involved in systemic changes. But like until then, we are good. Yeah, just all this to say that it's perfectly fine to treat symptoms and to do that with big organizations and things like that. It's just that like, right now we are lacking the systemic change efforts. Now, in order to even consider having an impact on a systems level, we need to tackle a problem that we call quick fix-itis. Quick fix-itis is what I would categorize it as a mild mental illness. Because in terms of structures, it's very similar to, for example, a social anxiety. Like when you have a social anxiety, you might enter a room and then there are a few people there, and in the back corner, a few people are like in hushed voices talking to each other. And if you have this anxiety, this mental illness, then you might immediately jump to the conclusion that they're talking about you, and then you might feel unwelcome and you might leave the room. And so basically, you see something in the world, and then your brain jumps to unwarranted conclusions, and that makes you make suboptimal decisions. And that will hurt you in the long run. And that's exactly what we are doing in the social sector all the time. So we see something in the world, in this case, a social problem, as mentioned, the homeless people, the trees that are being cut down, the mass problems. And then we jump to an unwarranted conclusion immediately, which is our solution. We find some magic wand, and we use it and wave it around and try to solve the thing that we saw. And that is just for systemic issues not gonna work. And so what we propose is an antidote for quick fix-itis. With this process, we still start with the social problem, of course, right? That's the motivating force that urges us to act, to change something in the world. But instead of immediately jumping to solutions and implementing stuff, we sit down and breathe and do nothing. And essentially that's already 80% of the trick. Because sitting down and doing nothing allows us to insert a few steps that in quick fix-itis mode we just don't find time and mental energy to do. And those 3 steps are: first, we look at the systemic root causes of the problem. So for the homeless people, we might realize, well, there's actually a social support structure looking into this. We might realize that the way that we deal with drug addiction in this country has an effect on that. We might look at the labor market. We might look at the housing situation, like just the housing market in a given area, etc., etc., etc. And then like having this list of maybe 10 or 15 social systems that contribute to the problem in a complex way, we might identify 1 or 2 leverage points, like specific elements of specific subsystems that we might realistically be able to change in like a 10-year time frame. And out of those, we select only 1 targeted systems change goal. And once we have done that, we say, okay, well, even this targeted small systems change goal is still a systems change goal, and so it will require a lot of time and milestones to achieve. And that's what we write down. Like we think backwards. If this is the goal, then these are the steps that we need to take. Not just me as one person or entrepreneur or social venture, but like we as society have to take. These are the steps we have to achieve, and we combine these steps into a systems change story. Like basically, if you have the book of systems change, then those would be your chapters or your dramatic milestones. And only when we have realized all of that stuff are we considering our contributions to the problem. And then you have a shot. Yeah, then you have an actual chance of solving the problem as opposed to just treating the symptoms. All right. This is how the first of these steps can look like. All of this is documented also in an online course where for each of those 5 steps we have specific exercises to guide you through this, and I brought one of them, which is the problem tree, which I guess most of you will know, but with a twist, namely that the root causes, the roots of the tree, have to be described in systemic terms. Here's an example. The trunk of the problem in this particular case is that in the United States, like there are way too many prisoners. Like they have like well over 20% of the world's prisoner count, but only 5% of the population. And in addition to that, they also have severe racial disparities. So it's not just too many prisoners; it's also like distributed in an inequitable way. And so this particular social entrepreneur looked at the contributing root causes of this. And the criminal system, like the criminal justice system, is one of the contributing social systems. There are more, like the labor market and others, and the education system, the healthcare system, they also play a role here. But that fellow decided to focus on the criminal justice system. And the first point is that that's not concrete enough. So we try to be really super specific. So within the criminal justice systems, there are subsystems that we want to look at. So one of them is the criminal defense system. So this is the stuff where somebody is brought to court and has to defend themselves. Yeah? And one problem there is that the accused in those systems don't have the knowledge and the resources to really defend themselves. They get these public defenders that are chronically and systemically overworked, and they can only do minimal interventions, and they can't even prepare proper defenses. A second leverage point might be the US court proceeding system. So this is how, like, these are the process or the practices that actually play out in a court proceeding. So the way that the court cases are being put forward and facilitated by a judge and stuff like that. And one of those elements there is that people have to pay bail. So like they are not even declared guilty, but they already have to pay a fine because otherwise they will go to prison. And that's an issue for poor people because they might end up in prison way longer and sooner than would be needed. And that has all kinds of repercussion effects. So that might get them into trouble in their work and their family dynamics, etc., etc. So this is one thing you could look at. There's also the US jail system, etc. So you can continue this list. And here we are even just talking about the criminal justice system, right? We haven't even looked at education and healthcare. But this is the level of analysis you should be doing. Yeah? Look at the problem, figure out which element in which system contributes to the problem. Oh, I even had a bigger view. And here are just some, this is of course not an exhaustive list by any means, but this gives you an idea about the kind of systems that you could look at. And like there are economic systems, these are value chains, or marriage markets, like formal and informal markets. The drug market is also a perfectly fine market to look at from a social change perspective. The elements that you would be looking at here are like workers, companies, professional associations, like business incentives, regulations, etc. So like the things that become interesting for you to look at depend on the type of system you look at. Like if you compare the economic systems to the cultural ones on the right-hand side, here the areas of interest are ideologies, shared knowledge, the arts, language, etc. And aspects are how culture spreads and changes, how language acquisition is moving from one generation to the next. The elements are like artists, places and institutions, social norms, values, prejudices, aesthetic preferences in society. So like all kinds of tangible and more fuzzy stuff that interact in complex ways to produce these problems that we ultimately care about. And the point here is that really no social system is safe from social innovations and our interventions. So if you realize at some point that the UN is contributing in a significant way to a social problem that you're interested in, well, then change the UN. You know, that's not a problem. Like we develop strategies for these kinds of things on a regular basis. We do this with a time horizon of 10 to 20 years anyway. And if you keep at it, and if you find the right partners, and if you do it for these timeframes, and your strategy is sound, then well, in 20 years, hopefully the UN will have changed in some significant way. And that happens all the time, and that's what we should be doing. And you can also, of course, also have ambitions that are happening on the lower level. So if you want to change the political participation processes on a city level, by all means, go ahead. It doesn't have to always be the WHO or these supranational organizations, but this is just to say, once you have identified a systemic leverage point, don't be intimidated by its pervasiveness, like the mental model that societies have, or by how high it is in the political order, like the UN. It's just social systems; they can all be changed. No need to be afraid of anything. Now, how do you get to these leverage points? Well, the good thing is there are only 6, so here they are. You can just go through them in a very structured way if you don't already know exactly what they are. One leverage point is policy, so these are the rules of the game. These can be national laws, they can be administrative like regulations, it can be the sourcing policies of big companies, like basically everything that is formally written down. It can also be like more informal rules, like basically whenever in a social interaction, if you do this and everybody turns to you and looks weird, then that can also be categorized as a kind of social policy. There are practices. These are the things, how they are being done in the system. So like the way that in German schools, most of the time, there's a teacher standing at the front and students sitting and listening. That's a way to do education. That's maybe not the best way to do education, but it's a common practice and it can be changed. We have also resource flow. So this is not just about money. Resources in the system can also be like physical, like materials, like wood and water. It can be information, it can be political favors, it can be like social goodwill, social capital. It can be all like whatever flows within a system can be categorized here, and of course that too can be changed. You can look at relationships. So in the classroom example again, like you have the role of a teacher and you have a role of a student, and then they have a certain interaction with each other, which is hierarchical, and you could think of different relationships. So you could change that to the students teaching themselves and the teacher just being a facilitator of the peer learning, and then you have the same people in the classroom but completely different relationships between them. One particular type of relationship is power. It's so important that it gets its own leverage point, because often, especially for the deeper systemic changes, we just have to address power dynamics at some point or other. And this is basically who has the ability to change the agenda, the stuff that the system talked about, who has decision-making power within the system, like who can decide how the practices work, how the resources are being allocated, the policies that govern the system, and who has the ability to shift how the system is operating. And finally, at the very bottom, we have the mental models. This is how we think about the world, and ultimately, this dictates how the rest of the system is set up. So there's a nice example by the great system thinker Donella Meadows, who talked about a forest next to a community. And like coming from our modern mental model around forests, we might think of them as a pool of natural resources that we can exploit for our economic goals. And if we are clever, we might do it sustainably, but ultimately, either way, it's a pool of natural resources that should serve humanity in some way. Yeah? And if you have this mental model, then you're going to find efficient ways of exploiting that resource. Yeah? So the resource is going to flow through all kinds of value chains, and this is going to generate money, which you can then distribute somehow using power and economic practices and business models. And so that's how the system looks like if you have this mental model. Alternatively, you might think of the forest as the natural manifestation of like a globe spanning God that lives with you, hopefully in some sort of harmony. And if that's how you view the forest, then you will most likely not cut it down and use it for economic activities, because it might enrage the God that the forest is a natural manifestation of. And so if that's your mental model, all the rest of the system is going to look very, very differently. Yeah, and so changing these mental models can be very, very powerful. Also, of course, quite difficult because it's such a deep change. But we do have, for example, a whole online course on how to change mental models. If you realize that mental models are ultimately the problem, don't be afraid to change them with a very targeted strategy that is going for mindset shifts in society. This is ultimately just another leverage point that we can attack very directly. All right, and this brings us to a little exercise. So you only like 4 to 5 minutes, and everybody can do this for themselves. So just have a moment of silence, pick pen and paper, and write a little problem tree. So pick any big problem. I mean, if you're in this webinar, then chances are that you are already working on some social issue anyway. So just write that down. Yeah, what's the specific tangible thing in the world that really bothers you and that you want to get rid of? Like, it should be stuff that you can capture on camera, right? Don't write the inflexible legislation in air. No, like there are not enough wind parks, there is not enough forests, there's too many people having this problem, like very, very specifically. Yeah. And then try to identify 2 of those systemic root causes. And these root causes have 2 elements, right? So there should be the name of a system, ideally a very concrete subsystem. So not just the education system, but the classroom dynamics in primary schools in Germany, or the teacher education system, or, you know, like drill it down, be as specific as possible. And then within those subsystems, identify one of those 6 leverage points. There is a policy, there is a practice, there is a resource flow, there's a relationship, there's a power dynamic, or there is a mental model that contributes on an ongoing basis to this problem that I don't like. And that's it. That's the very important first and even the second step of this antidote to quick fix cycles, this sitting down and doing nothing to gain clarity. And then afterwards, we just see what happens and we look at a few examples. So unless there are any urgent questions, 5 minutes of silence, pick your problem, identify a few roots of that problem tree. See you back here in 5.
So time is almost up, I would say. What do you think, Odin?
Yep, indeed. So let's come back and let's hear a few examples. So which problem did you choose and which leverage points did you identify?
I see that there's a whole crowd joining from Wiesbaden, so maybe some of the participants that are joining us through Heimathafen Wiesbaden, maybe one of you, or maybe you've been discussing some of the system challenges that you've been tackling, or how did you do the exercise, or did you do it on an individual basis? Any of you, since you're a group anyways.
Exercise. Should we summarize it, or I didn't get the question?
So I think Odin was just encouraging people to share their examples and what they've been working on. So maybe you can give us some insights on the topics you've been dealing with in your exercise, or maybe also part of your daily work, I guess.
So we're coming straight. So today is World Wednesday, right? So we had a big breakfast a couple of minutes ago. That's why we're a little late. We had roughly 80 women and 5 guys over there. So and today, fitting to the day, we asked the question why there is so few female founders, and the percentage of female startups and stuff is still way too big. And we asked what the root causes are. And what the leverage points are, and we found, or at least we couldn't finish it, of course, in 4 minutes. We found, of course, that there's mental models and maybe even differences that will stay in female identities and female way to found something. But then there's also how society, how our systems shape the way we think and what we expect from ourselves and what we think is possible. And then, of course, there's systemic differences. Is that the right word?
Yeah, such as power and relationships, for example, but also resource flow. If you see, especially venture capital is still going rather to men and to women, there's still a discrepancy. So there are different leverage points and different root causes where you have to have on. It's still a systemic problem, even we have made some progress. We were still starting a heated discussion, so we could finish like one. Yeah.
Great. This was actually also my very first thought. the topic, maybe to summarize, because I think the sound quality was maybe not the best, but I think it's definitely a good occasion, right? Today's Women's Day, also thinking a bit about women both in the social enterprise / startup landscape, and I think the disproportionate sense we see is also reflected on an investor side. Yeah, so of course here we also talk about certain bias that we apply, and I think there's always this bias to invest in like-minded people. Yeah, and of course I think for gender is one aspect and one very dimension when we talk about diversity, but of course there's still a lot more.
Yeah, and I mean, the heated debates are, of course, what these kind of tools are supposed to facilitate. So that, and they are not, these tools don't make it easier. You still have to have the debate. You still have to prioritize your leverage point and identify all of them. But at the very least, they make sure that that your fights are happening on the right level, which is the systems level. Yeah, that's the benefit. Now, when you talk about these mindsets and these relationships, my encouragement would be to be like even more specific, right? So yes, there might be mindsets at stake, but like, what are they? So what are when you talk about the mindset, what we want to know is if you put yourself like almost as a comic figure, right? So what's in their thought bubble? What's the sentence that you want to change? And what's the belief, the actual belief? That we need to get rid of here. Or for relationships, well, so a relationship is between 2 parts of the system. So what are the 2 parts? What exactly is the relationship like? What are the aspects of it? Like, is it is it collaborative, antagonistic? Is one influencing the other? Is one buying from the other and paying it back? Is one using political favor to nudge them? Is one teaching the other? Is one influencing the investment decisions of the, like what specifically is this relationship? And how does it look now? And how do you want it to look in the future? You know, like we really need to be, like, needs to be super clear what we are after. All right. Does anybody else have a problem and some root causes? And the FASE is, of course, not excluded, because I happen to know that you have systemic goals, so don't fear.
Yeah, so in that case, maybe I can share mine. So I was thinking that currently the childcare is really a big issue, especially like in Germany. I don't know if it's that bad in other countries, but I think one system which is an issue there is the kindergarten system, that the kindergarten teachers are not really paid enough and maybe also not appreciated enough. And another system is also the politics. I think in the last years, they also closed their eyes about what they need to do, and instead of just putting everything on the parents to organize. So I think some of the leverage points would be that the politics would have a look at it and not just leave it on the shoulders of the parents, but see what they can really do, and maybe also raise wages. And also in the mindset, I would see that the work of the preschool teachers really has to be more appreciated, that they see that it's just a very, very important part of the society, what they are doing. And the little children are our next generation, and also in the economies, and that that it's very important how they are treated in kindergarten. And for example, in my kindergarten, I can just tell that for now it's just not enough people looking after the children. That's why they don't really have any special programs. They are just drawing like 20 things at one day, instead of having really nice programs where they can be seen and also grow in their minds.
Right. Now, so because let me, the whole mindset shift thingy is to some extent it's a very special type of strategy that we need there, and there are a few special considerations we need to make. This is typically beyond what we can do in a 1-hour introduction. Again, there's a whole online course just on that, but what I will say is that if you want to, for example, improve the social standing of a job, or the attractiveness, or the social capital that comes with it, this is typically not something you do directly. It's more like if you change the pay, if you make it harder to get in, if you improve the career options, if you improve how much training these people get over the course of their careers, if you do all that stuff, then that will lead to, you know, a higher stat. So it's not like you improve so it's more like a spiraling thing. So you do some of the structural changes like the pay, etc. That improves the standing, that allows you to do more of the structural changes. So you have a back and forth. And so it would, in this case, be important, I think, to know exactly what in this particular part of the labor market and the kindergarten system has to change, so that you can have a little improvement in the mindsets, which allows you then to go back to the structural changes. Now, in terms of politics should do something. So whenever you talk about root causes, whenever there's a word, it's probably not yet what we are looking for. So because these leverage points, they are nouns, right? It's policies, practices, resource flows. And of course, somebody should do something at some point. Yeah, I mean, ultimately, figuring out strategies the purpose is to know what we should be doing. But that's not the root cause. Like politics having slept, that might have been true, but that's not a systemic barrier. So it's if you say politics hasn't done enough, well, politics would be policies, right? That's what politics is for. You might also say that the administration hasn't done enough. This would be around resources and practices, maybe. So if you start with this insight that there is a political, that the politics hasn't really caught up, then that would be a reason to look into what policies exactly would have to change. Where are we behind here? Just saying this particular type of actor, like the politicians, have to do more, that's not yet enough to do a strategy, because we don't know what. We don't know what to push for. We don't know which advocacy alliances we have to build. We don't know which best practices to develop and spread. And so, like, it's really important to move away from verbs. We should do X. Somebody should do something. And towards these, there is a policy. It is policy X right now, but it should be policy Y in the future, and then you can define a strategy. All right. Let me, but I think you got the gist of it, right? So you second, getting back to the presentation mode. So you start with these root causes, and only when you have identified the specific leverage points and know what you're after, you develop the actual strategy. But that's your linchpin. Now, one word of caution, and what this sometimes leads to is that that we fall back into our standard analytical mindset, where we break things apart. We try to understand and optimize the parts, and then we hope that by just putting it back together, we have solved the problem. And I can assure you that that will not work. So this is one of the basic insights of systems thinking, that when you do these exercises, like understanding the different root causes and how these things interact, this is what you're after. You want to understand the relationships between these leverage points and how they interact, so you can improve the whole. Yeah, so of course you will intervene at specific points, but you don't do that to improve that part of the overall thing, but you do it because you know that if you change that part, it will have repercussions in other parts, and then the whole thing will work more the way you think it should. That's just that's a little bit more of an abstract thing that will become more clear if you spend a lot of hours on this. But this is just a warning that, like, don't fall back into the linear kind of cause effect thinking. It needs to be a little bit more like, in terms of feedback loops and who changes what and what the relationships between things are. All right, so coming back to our 5-step antidote to quick fix cycles, we have looked at the systemic root causes, and we have maybe identified one of them as our targeted systems change goal. And once you're at this step, the question is, well, the thing that you have selected at this point is still kind of difficult, right? So you might say, what did we have? Well, we want to increase the share of female founders, and to do that, we want to change the power dynamics in the startup investment system, so that the decisions are not made only by boards of white men, but instead 30% of the investment decisions are made from a crowd. I don't know. I'm making stuff up. This might be a completely counterproductive systems change, but it would be a concrete systems change that you can go after. Yeah. Now, that is not an easy thing to do, right? So we are talking about new decision-making processes in the startup investment system. And it's not like you can't just go into the world and say, this is my idea, or you can't just start a venture. That it's not so, we need to be clever about achieving this goal. And the good thing is, though, that there are only 6 types of strategies that are available to you. And so just as for the leverage points, you might start this exercise with a little bit of confusion, like what what are the systemic leverage points? What are the root causes of my problem? Well, but the good thing is there are only 6 things you can change anyway, so you just go through them and then you find out. Yeah, and similarly, once you have identified a systems change goal, you might be confused about or not immediately clear what type of strategy you can use to achieve this goal. But good thing again, there are only 6. So this a full explanation and is available in the online course, but just to give you an idea, right? So you have heard them one, and you can maybe come back to this slide whenever you have this decision to make. So which strategy do we use to achieve our systems change goal? The first one is competitive advantages. And the idea here is that this new thing that you want to bring to the system, whoever uses it has an advantage over all the other players that they are competing with. And whenever that's the case, your strategy is fairly simple. You make sure that one player has this advantage. You document it in a super tight and clear and deep way so that nobody can dispute that this player has the advantage. And then you just spread the news and wait. Because the other competitors will not endure a competitive disadvantage over long periods of time. At some point, they will adopt the innovation. As long as they understand that they have a disadvantage, it will only be a matter of time. So think of this as like the this high jump technique where you do like this weird back bending technique to fly over the bar. This was introduced in at one Olympic Games, and everybody was still using the old technique of jumping over the bar in like this horizontal way. There was one athlete who used the new technique. He won. Next Olympic Games, everybody used the new technique. Yeah? So this is something we can use for social change. This can be applied to, for example, entrepreneurship centers at universities, or anyway, there are lots of applications, right? But you need to make sure that the new thing actually gives an advantage to whoever uses it. Second example is the whale. Here, the strategy is to change the behavior of one particularly important player. So this can be the biggest donor in the field, the market leader in an industry, the most prestigious university, the best philharmonic orchestra, like something that is like, if you change that, everybody will notice and adopt it too, or because the player is so big, you have basically changed the industry because like that player makes up 60% of the industry, and so you have won. And here what you do is you design the strategy only around the whale. Nothing else matters. So you do everything super like tailor-made for that one actor. If you want to change a particular practice at Harvard University, you go there, you know about the people, the decision makers, you learn when they go to lunch and where. You know exactly what their decision processes are, you know exactly how they have decided in the past. Like you really hone in on your whale and change that actor. In contrast to the whale, we have the strategy of the many fishes. Here, the idea is to spread an idea via trainings, open sourcing, or other replication techniques. This might be necessary if you want to change the behavior of all museums in Egypt, or all psychotherapists in France, or like, you know, like these groups of actors, like somewhere between 10 and 10,000, but not more. So it's not like mass movements would be a different strategy, but like, yeah, a specific type of player that defines a field. Yeah? And for this, you can't rely on competitive advantages, because then you would be in the other end game. You need to push your idea somehow. And so here we talk about efficient ways of replicating a new social innovation. Going to the bottom row, we have the strategy of the formal process. And here, the path towards your systems change is actually clear and laid out in front of you. It's defined. It's if you want to change the way that like a World Health Organization white paper for how to deal with a certain epidemic crisis, well, There's a process for that. You know exactly which working group and expert groups you have to go to, who makes the decision, who has to validate it, ratify it. You know, it's just clear what the steps are. And you have to make sure that your system's changing new idea, the social innovation, has the right kind of format to fit through that process. So it needs to be presented in the form of a parliamentary proposal or a white paper suggestion, or I don't know, like a company presentation. Like the system needs to be able to deal with this thing that you want to bring to it. And then you need to support it, right? So you need to find people who propose it, who support it in the system, who provide the right kind of evidence. So you basically shepherd your new idea through the formal process that is defined and cannot be changed. Fifth strategy, building a field or market. Here the idea is to make it easier for a whole field to have more impact, or to advance an industry, to build a new market. Yeah? And these new markets could be like, I don't know, the field of microfinance, the field of psychosocial therapy, the field of, I don't know, they are all over the place. And here what we do is we try to help these fields in their stages of development. First we try to establish a baby field, the smallest possible field that is self-sustaining, like a few practitioners, a simple way of meeting them in a yearly conference, that's it. And then we help these fields grow through adolescence and adulthood. And so we get more intermediaries on board. We try to get industry associations going. Like we make this thing more sophisticated and formalized. And ultimately, there is the strategy of narrative changes that I mentioned briefly, and that is kind of its own animal. But again, you can change how society thinks about certain things by basically changing the narrative environment. So like when you talk about the narratives around female founders, for example, then you have to look at where these gender stereotypes are being crafted by society, and the stories we tell about men and women and founding in particular, and where those stories are being generated. So this might be the school environment, this might be the space of advertisement, this could be the startup incubator program environments. This, like, you need to look into all these different areas of society where stories are being produced that feed a certain mindset. And then you need to disrupt those environments so that different kinds of stories are being produced, feeding a new kind of mindset. And again, this is a very clear strategy that you can build in a very structured way. And that's it. So this is the framework that we use at Ashoka Globalizer, which is an international accelerator program that focuses only on systems change strategies. And these are the tools that we have been using for like over 100 leading, with over 100 leading social entrepreneurs from all around the world in all kinds of fields and industries and systems in society. And this is what has worked for us. And when we look at, for example, at the 6 types of strategies so far, we could fit everything we have developed into those categories. So like it might not be exhaustive, but it's a very good first attempt to map your options. Yeah? And so we don't have time for it in this webinar, but whenever you have your goal identified, this is what you can come back to and say, okay, what could we do now? What's the plan? Yeah? And more info about this again in the courses and the materials. Now, let me stop at this point because I think in English I'm a little bit slower than I was in German, so that we have a little bit of time for questions and answers before we wrap up. Is there anything that comes to mind? Anything you want to know about?
I would have a question, because you mentioned those different ways to tackle systemic change, but it's never either or, right? But it's always a combination of most. Do you have a thumb rule or so where you say those are absolute necessity and others are alternatives, or how many do you have to combine? Like, what's the must do for anyone who wants to systemic change? Yeah, exactly. So there's definitely mixing and matching going on.
What I will say though, like typically there is an overarching, like we call these 6 thingies end games. There's an overarching end game. So if you want to change the WHO white paper, that is a formal process and you will not get around that. Like you have to go through the decision-making processes of the WHO. But you can, of course, use, for example, like in order to get the support you need to make the WHO make this decision, you could, for example, employ a big whale part of your strategy. Like maybe there's one supporter that is so influential that the whole thing would be a breeze. Yeah. Then your overarching endgame would be the formal process, but an important part of it to get to that point, you use a big whale strategy to get the most important supporter on board. And this is how we often do it. Like maybe there's the overarching thing is a field building strategy, but one part of field building would be to get 200 practitioners online who self-identify as practitioners in this new system, like who self-identify as psychosocial therapists, let's say. And for that, you'd use a strategy of the beneficiaries to get this one element ready for the overall strategy. Yeah? And this is how you can combine the different elements.
Thanks. And I wonder if your list also includes something like a cooperation model, because I'm limited to specific approaches. So I can't be the big whale. It's just not what we are as a community or a hub here. But we could also go through your canvas and see what can we do ourselves and where do we need cooperation partners. And then maybe go out and search for the big whale to be part of our movement, or to search for the policymaker. Is that another way to go, or kind of canvas?
Oh, this is the way to go. No, this thing doesn't say what you are. Like it doesn't say this is what you do as a whale, or this is what you do as a policymaker, or as like the strategy would be to convince a big whale who is not you. Like if it was you, you could just make the decision and be done with it. You would need no strategy. You would just implement the systems change yourself immediately, right? It's kind of pointless then to sit down and do all these exercises. Like, but of course, right? If the strategy needs the big whale, it means you are not the big whale, so you need to convince them somehow. And of course, depending on who you are, you have different methods of influencing that you can use. And I'm not quite sure what kind of animal you are, but like with this kind of networky, acceleratory kind of vibe I get here, you have, of course, different tools at your disposal compared to Siemens, compared to Ashoka, compared to, you know.
Fantastic. Since we're actually already approaching the end of this event, I really would like to take opportunity thanking you all very much for your very interactive participation. Very warm thanks to Odin, especially also for all the very illustrative examples that you brought in. I think once more it became clear that the topic is certainly complex, yeah, and it's of course also too much of content, but we can so the discussion is of course non-exhaustive in 60 minutes, but I think it was a very nice overview session, and I think yeah, it gave us a very nice inspiration and enthusiasm to keep up the work, because we see there are substantial challenges, and we also see that many of them are actually also connected, right? Because I think the two topics that came up, one being like this, the female founder landscape, and then childcare. So both often also have a gender component. So I think, yeah, that's very interesting. Also, just to mention once again that the recording of this session will be made available, as well as on the other 3 sessions held in English that we had in the previous weeks. They're also available. I'm just going to share the link here to the YouTube channel, so you find more information on that in your case you want to dive deeper or want to look one of the previous sessions. And there will be 2 more KoSI webinars taking place in April. So I think LinkedIn is a good place, or the newsletter, however you learn about today's events, so there we will also announce the upcoming events. So this being said, thanks a lot, everyone, and have a fantastic day.